I don't need a wife, Ethan Caldwell said, slamming the agency letter onto the table so hard the coffee cup rattled. I need someone who can survive a Montana winter without crying about it. His neighbors stared at him. Then why'd you write the letter? Ethan picked up his hat, walked to the door, stopped. Because the ranch was silent in a way that had nothing to do with quiet. Because he hadn't spoken a full sentence to another human being in 11 days. Because some kinds of loneliness don't announce themselves until they're already killing you. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Montana Territory, 1887. Ethan Caldwell had not always been a man who kept his feelings buried under 3 feet of frozen ground. There was a time a long time ago or so it felt when he laughed easily, when he sat on his porch in the summer evenings and felt something close to contentment settling in his chest like warm coffee after a cold ride. That time was gone now. Gone the way certain things go when you lose someone who is holding the whole shape of your life together, and you don't realize how much they were holding until the morning you wake up and nothing looks the way it used to. He was 36 years old. He had built the ranch with his own hands, every fence post, every beam in the barn ceiling, every stone in the fireplace. He never lit anymore because it felt wrong to be warm alone. The land was good. The cattle were healthy. By any measure, a man in Black Pine Creek, Montana Territory might apply to another man's life. Ethan Caldwell was doing fine. The problem was, he didn't feel fine. He felt like a house somebody had moved out of and forgotten to lock. His nearest neighbor was a man named Roy Dawson, 62 years old, loud as a summer thunderstorm, and absolutely incapable of minding his own business. Roy had been riding over to check on Ethan since the winter. Ethan stopped showing up at the church socials, and Roy had been making gentle then not so gentle suggestions about what Ethan needed ever since. What you need, Roy said one Thursday morning, helping himself to the coffee Ethan had not offered him, is a wife. What I need, Ethan said without looking up from the harness he was mending, is for you to drink that coffee and ride back home before I count to 20. I'm serious, Ethan. So am I. Roy set down his cup. He looked at Ethan the way older men look at younger ones when they've watched them make the same mistake long enough that watching has become painful. I know a man over in Helena, Roy said. He used a marriage agency, good respectable women. Women who want a real life, not just a fancy drawing room. Women who understand what frontier living means. I understand what frontier living means, Ethan said. It means there's no time for nonsense. A wife isn't nonsense. At my age, with my schedule with this ranch and these winters and the way I live. Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were flat and serious and very tired. Roy, I wake up at 4 in the morning. I come in after dark. I eat standing up half the time. I haven't been to town for pleasure in 8 months. What woman in her right mind wants that life? Roy smiled slowly. The right one. Ethan went back to his harness. Go home, Roy. Roy went home, but 3 days later, he came back with a pamphlet from the agency. He left it on Ethan's kitchen table while Ethan was out checking the east pasture fence line. Ethan found it that evening. He read it standing up in his coat with his hat still on, intending to throw it in the fire. He read it twice. He sat down. He read it a third time. He told himself he was only considering it from a practical angle. He was not getting younger. The ranch was too much for one man to manage perfectly. He had lost 2 good hands to the silver mines last spring and couldn't afford to replace them both. Having someone to manage the house, the food stores, the supply organization, that was simply smart ranching. It had nothing to do with the silence. It had nothing to do with the fact that some mornings he sat at the table with his coffee and realized he had not said a single word out loud in 3 days. He wrote the letter that night. He was blunt. He did not dress it up or make promises he had no intention of keeping. Remote ranch 6 miles outside Black Pine Creek, Montana Territory. Difficult winters. Long workdays beginning before sunrise. I am not a man who speaks much or who has time for entertainment or social calls. I will not promise romance. I will not pretend this is a charming arrangement. What I offer a fair division of work, consistent food and shelter, and my word that I am an honest man who does not drink excessively or raise his hand to anyone under his roof. I expect a woman who is healthy, practical and serious about the work involved in frontier life. Sentimental expectations will be a disappointment for both of us. If you are that woman, write back. Ethan Caldwell. He expected silence in return. He had written the least romantic advertisement in the history of the agency, and he knew it. Maybe that was even a little intentional. He didn't want to attract someone who was romanticizing the frontier from the pages of a dime novel. He wanted someone with clear eyes and strong hands who understood the difference between what a hard life looked like in a story and what it felt like in January, when the wind came down off the mountains like a judgment. 6 weeks later, he got a letter back. He stood at the table and looked at it for a long moment before he opened it. The handwriting on the outside was neat without being fancy. The return address was Dayton, Ohio. He opened it. Mr. Caldwell, I read your letter 3 times. I appreciate that you did not pretend. I will not pretend either. I am 27 years old. I have worked as a household manager for the past 4 years, and I understand what real work requires. I do not expect romance. I expect fairness and honesty. You offered both. I can cook, manage food stores, treat minor injuries, handle most household repairs, and I am not afraid of cold weather. I have never been to Montana, but I am not the kind of woman who is frightened by the word remote. If you are willing to have a serious conversation about this arrangement, I would like to speak further. Clara Bennett. Ethan read it once, sat down, read it again. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He smiled. Not a wide smile. Barely a smile at all. Really. Just a slight movement at one corner of his mouth there, and gone in a second. But it had been long enough since anything had produced that reaction that it caught him off guard. He wrote back that same evening. The correspondence that followed over the next 2 months was unlike anything Ethan had expected. He had anticipated brief, practical exchanges about logistics. What he got was something closer to a conversation, an actual, genuine back-and-forth conversation, of the sort he hadn't had with anyone in longer than he could comfortably admit. Clara Bennett did not waste words. She asked about the cattle operation and listened to his answers seriously. She asked about the supply situation and made 3 specific suggestions about winter food storage that Ethan grudgingly had to admit were good ones. She asked about the distance to the nearest doctor and did not seem disturbed when he said 12 miles in good weather, impassable in a blizzard. She also asked once a question he didn't expect. What do you miss most about having someone else on the ranch? He sat with that question for 3 days before he answered it. Honesty. I miss having someone to hand a cup of coffee to in the morning. It sounds small. It isn't. Her reply came 2 weeks later. It doesn't sound small at all. By the time they had exchanged 7 letters, Ethan had made a decision he hadn't consciously noticed himself making. He sent the agency the formal paperwork. Clara Bennett would come to Black Pine Creek, Montana territory on the 3rd of September. She would become his wife. He told himself it was a practical arrangement, and he believed it because he had gotten very good at believing the things he told himself. William Parker had been working Ethan's ranch for 9 years. He was 51 years old, built like a man who had spent 5 decades doing serious physical labor, and he had exactly one diplomatic skill, which was knowing when to keep his mouth shut and when to speak up before his employer made a mistake he'd regret. She's coming in on the afternoon stage, William said on the morning of September 3rd, not looking up from the horse he was grooming. I know when she's coming, Ethan said. You planning to clean up before you go to meet her? Ethan looked down at himself. What's wrong with how I look? William turned around slowly and looked at him for a long, considering moment. Nothing, William said with the particular tone of a man who means the opposite. Nothing at all. Ethan changed his shirt. He arrived at the stage station 40 minutes early. He stood outside in the September afternoon, hat in hand, watching the road that came down from the north with a tightness in his chest that he refused to identify as nervousness. It was just focus. He was focused. There was a significant practical development occurring in his life, and he was appropriately attentive to it. That was all. The stage arrived in a cloud of dust and the sound of hooves. 3 passengers got off. A merchant Ethan recognized from the general store, a young man who immediately started looking around for someone, and then a woman in a gray traveling dress. She was not what he had pictured. He had pictured someone older somehow, someone with the look of a woman who had run out of other options. He had pictured desperation, or at least resignation. What came down those stage steps was neither. She carried one small suitcase, the kind that said she had made careful decisions about what mattered. Her hair was dark and pulled back practically. Her dress was plain and road dusty. Her face, when she turned and looked around the street of Black Pine Creek with clear, steady eyes, showed no fear. It showed assessment. She was looking at this town the same way Ethan looked at a piece of land he was considering purchasing, measuring it, weighing it, forming an honest opinion. Then she saw him. He must have looked like the most obvious person in the world, the lone man standing away from the crowd, hat in his hands, watching her with the expression of someone trying very hard to look like they weren't nervous. She walked toward him directly. No hesitation. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Miss Bennett." He put out his hand. She shook it. Her grip was firm. Her hands up close showed what 4 years of real household work looked like. "I believe we agreed to an honest arrangement," she said. "We did. Then I'd like to be honest with you right now, if that's all right." Ethan studied her face. "Go ahead." "I'm tired from the journey. I'm hungry. And I would very much like to see where I'll be living before I decide how I feel about it." She picked up her suitcase. "Is the wagon far?" Ethan stared at her for a moment. "No," he said. "Good." She looked at him with those steady eyes. "Shall we go?" For the second time in as many months, Ethan Caldwell did something that surprised him. He stepped forward and took her suitcase from her hand. "Wagon's around the corner," he said. She fell into step beside him, as naturally as if they had been doing it for years. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet Ethan had expected to be managing awkwardly, just the ordinary quiet of 2 people who didn't feel the need to fill silence with noise. Clara sat beside him on the wagon seat and watched the landscape change from town to open country to the base of the mountains with the same steady attention she had given everything else. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said, after they had been riding for perhaps 20 minutes. "Montana has a way of being larger than a person expects," Ethan said. "I mean the sky." He glanced at her. She was looking up. The sky over the mountains in September, just before sunset, was a particular shade of deep blue that artists tried to paint and never quite got right. "People notice it more when they're not from here," Ethan said. "Do you still notice it?" He looked at the sky. Honestly looked at it for the first time, and he couldn't say how long. "I used to," he said. She nodded like that answer told her something useful. When the ranch came into view, she studied it with that same assessing look. The barn, the house, the fence lines, the water situation, the position relative to the mountain wind. He could watch her working through the details and found himself curious what conclusions she was reaching. "It's a good location," she said finally. "Thank you." "The supply storage is on the wrong side of the barn for winter access." Ethan frowned. "Excuse me. If your winters are as bad as you described, accessing supply storage from the north side will cost you 20 minutes of exposure every time in a serious storm. It should be accessible from the connected south corridor." She said it simply, without apology or softening. "I noticed it from the road." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "I've been storing supplies there for 9 years. He said. "I know." She turned and looked at him calmly. "You asked for someone practical." He couldn't argue with that. He had in fact specifically asked for someone practical. "Get settled first," he said, pulling up to the house. "Supply storage can wait." She climbed down from the wagon before he could offer his hand. Not rudely, just efficiently, like someone who was used to managing herself. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, turning back when she reached the porch steps. "Yes." "I won't reorganize anything without asking you first." A pause. "Unless it's dangerous, then I'll reorganize it and tell you after." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. "Fair enough," he said. She went inside. He stood by the wagon in the September evening and listened to the silence that was, for the first time in a very long time, a slightly different kind of silence than it had been before. The first 2 weeks were a study in careful distance. They were polite. They were organized. They moved around each other in the house with the efficiency of two people who had, both in their different ways, learned to manage their space without crowding other people. Ethan was up at 4 every morning. By the time Clara appeared in the kitchen at 5:30, his coffee was made and he was usually already gone. She cooked breakfast and left a plate warming for him. He came in for the midday meal. They ate mostly in silence, and he went back out. In the evenings, they sometimes sat in the same room, Ethan with whatever needed mending, or his account books. Clara with her own tasks, but they didn't push conversation. It should have felt exactly like the arrangement he had asked for. He told himself it did. On the third day, she reorganized the kitchen. She said nothing about it. He came in for the midday meal and noticed everything had changed positions. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at his kitchen. "Is this all right?" Clara asked, not looking up from the stove. He walked to the cabinet where she had moved the coffee, opened it. The coffee was right there, front and center, easier to reach than it had been in 9 years. "Yes," he said. On the 5th day, he came back from the north fence line to find her on the roof of the small supply shed with a hammer and a bundle of new shingles. He stopped walking. "What are you doing?" he said. "There are 3 weak spots on this roof," she said without stopping what she was doing. "If they go in the first big snow, you'll lose half your winter supplies to water damage." "How did you know about the weak spots?" "I went up and looked." He stood there watching her work for a moment. She was competent. Not showy about it, not doing it to prove anything, just working with the focused efficiency of someone who saw a problem and fixed it. "You could have told me," he said. "I would have done it." She paused and looked down at him. "Would you have gotten to it before the snow?" He looked at the fence posts he had spent the last 2 days repairing, thought about the 3 other things on his list ahead of the supply shed roof. "Probably not," he said honestly. She went back to hammering. "I know." William, watching from the barn door with his arms crossed and the expression of a man watching something inevitable unfold, caught Ethan's eye and very carefully said nothing. The first real conversation they had, the kind that wasn't about the ranch or the supplies or the practical business of daily life, happened on the 11th night during a thunderstorm. They were both in the main room. Ethan was at the table with his accounts. Clara was repairing a tear in one of the heavy wool blankets they'd need when the cold came down. Outside, a storm had come in fast off the mountains the way Montana storms do, sudden and complete and enormous, filling the whole sky with noise. A crack of thunder hit so close that the house shook. The lamp on the table flickered. Clara's hand stopped moving. Ethan looked up. She was very still. Her expression had closed in a way he recognized. It was the look of someone managing something internal, very quietly, not wanting it observed. He looked back at his accounts. "Bad one," he said. "Yes," she said. He gave it a minute. "Does it bother you?" "The storms?" A pause. "I'm not frightened of them," she said. "I grew up in Ohio. We had storms." "But—" Another pause. Longer. "Sometimes loud, sudden things make me— I need a moment. That's all." Her voice was even. She didn't offer anything further. He thought about asking. He thought about what it meant that she had needed to say, "I need a moment," about something, and clearly had not expected anyone to notice or accommodate. "Take whatever time you need," he said, and looked back at his accounts. She looked at him. He could feel it without looking up. "Thank you," she said quietly. They sat in the storm together for another 2 hours without saying much of anything. But when the storm finally passed and Clara said goodnight and went to her room, Ethan sat for a long time at his table in the quiet. He was thinking about what it meant that she had thanked him for something so small, and what it said about the life she'd been living before she came here. On the 17th day, William finally said what he'd been not saying for 2 weeks. They were working in the barn, just the two of them, when William set down the tool he was holding and turned around. "You know what's happening, right?" William said. "I know what's happening in this barn," Ethan said. "We're fixing the wheel bearing on the supply wagon. I mean with her." Ethan kept working. "Nothing is happening with her. This is an arrangement." "I know what kind of arrangement you told yourself you were making," William said. "I also know what I watch every evening when you come in from the field." "And what's that?" "You check where she is before you do anything else." William said it plainly, without judgment. "You don't even know you're doing it, but you walk in that door and before you hang up your hat, your eyes find her. Every single time." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "She's a person living on this ranch," he said. "Of course I'm aware of where she is." William picked his tool back up. "Is that what we're calling it?" "That's what it is." "All right," William said, with the comfortable certainty of a man who knows he's right and is willing to wait for the other person to figure it out. It was on the 22nd day that Ethan found the letter. He hadn't been looking for anything. He had come inside to get a tool he'd left on the kitchen table, and a gust of wind had knocked Clara's small travel bag off the shelf near the door, and an envelope had slid out across the floor. He picked it up to put it back. He wasn't going to look at it, but the return address was visible, a law office in Dayton, Ohio, and one corner of the letter had unfolded itself enough that he could see the first line. "Miss Bennett. Regarding the matter of the Whitmore inquiry into your whereabouts." He put it back before he could read more. He put it back and walked out of the house and went and stood by the fence for 10 minutes, telling himself it was nothing. But it sat in the back of his mind that evening at supper and the evening after like a stone you can feel through your boot sole, small enough to ignore, significant enough that you can't quite forget it. Clara Bennett had come to Montana from Ohio, and it seemed like Ohio wasn't entirely done with her yet. 3 days later, another letter arrived. Ethan was in the barn when the boy from the post office rode out with it. Clara was in the house. The boy handed it to Ethan and rode away. Ethan held it for a long moment. Same return address as the one he'd accidentally seen. Same law office in Dayton. He brought it inside and set it on the table in front of Clara. She looked at it. Something passed through her expression, not exactly fear, but something adjacent to it. Something she controlled very quickly. "Thank you," she said. "You've gotten a few of those," he said. He kept his voice even. She looked up at him. "I have," she said. "Clara." He sat down at the table across from her. "We agreed to be honest with each other." "We did. Is there something I should know?" She looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "Not yet," she said. It wasn't a refusal. It wasn't a lie. It was something more complicated than either. Something that sounded like, "I'm not ready, but I'm not hiding it from you forever." He held her gaze. "All right," he said. He got up. He went back to work. But that night, alone in the quiet of the house while Clara slept and the wind came down off the mountains, Ethan Caldwell sat at his table and understood something he had been refusing to acknowledge for 3 weeks. He had told himself this was a practical arrangement. He had told himself he wanted nothing from this woman except competence and a fair partnership. He had told himself very carefully and very thoroughly that he was not capable of caring about another person the way he had once cared about someone and lost them. He had told himself all of that, and sitting in the dark, listening to the wind, he knew with the uncomfortable clarity of a man who has finally run out of room to lie to himself that he had been wrong on every single count. He cared about Clara Bennett. He cared what was in those letters. He cared why something like a loud thunderstorm made her go still and quiet and far away. He cared who Richard Whitmore was. And he cared more than he was remotely prepared for what it would mean if whatever she was running from finally caught up to her here. On his ranch. In the home he had spent 9 years telling himself was fine, exactly the way it was. The wind pressed against the house. Ethan sat in the dark and felt for the first time in years the specific and terrifying sensation of having something to lose. The morning after Ethan sat alone in the dark, understanding things he hadn't wanted to understand, he woke up at 4 o'clock, the same as always, pulled on his boots, the same as always, and walked into the kitchen to make his coffee, the same as always. Clara was already there. Not at 5:30, the way she usually appeared. At 4 o'clock in the dark, standing at the stove, with her hair down and a lamp burning low on the counter, heating something that smelled like it had been simmering for a while already. Ethan stopped in the doorway. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." She didn't turn around. "Sit down. There's coffee." He sat down. She poured it and set it in front of him and went back to the stove. He watched her move in the lamplight, efficient quiet, completely at ease, in a kitchen that had been his alone for 9 years, and felt the strangeness of it. Not an uncomfortable strangeness. The other kind. The kind that catches you off guard because it feels more natural than it has any right to. "What are you making?" he asked. "Soup, from the bones of last night's chicken." She stirred it. "It'll be ready by midday. I thought William might want some. He looked cold yesterday." Ethan wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. William. She had noticed William was cold yesterday. Ethan had worked beside William for 9 years and could not have told you with certainty whether William had seemed cold. "He'd appreciate that," Ethan said. She nodded and kept stirring. They sat in the near dark and the quiet for a while, just the sound of the soup and the wind outside and the occasional shift of the fire. It was the most comfortable Ethan had felt in the morning in longer than he could trace. "Clara," he said. The letter yesterday." He stopped, started again. "I'm not asking you to explain it. I want you to know that. But if there's something on this ranch that I need to be aware of, something that might affect your safety." He chose the words carefully. "I'd want to know." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's all." She turned around then. She looked at him across the kitchen, really looked the way she did sometimes, like she was measuring something she was trying to be accurate about. "You're a strange man, Ethan Caldwell," she said. "Strange how most men would have demanded I explain it the moment they saw the envelope. I'm not most men." "No." A pause. "You're not." She turned back to the stove. He drank his coffee. Outside the window, the darkness was starting to give up its edges, the faint gray light of a Montana morning beginning to press in around the mountains. "I will tell you," she said quietly. "I'm not ready yet, but I will." "I'll be here," he said. It was a simple thing to say. He meant it more completely than anything he had said in years. October arrived and brought the cold with it, the way Montana cold arrives. Not gradually, not with warning, but like a door being thrown open onto a world that has changed while you weren't watching. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in a single night. By the end of the first week of the month, the morning ground was hard with frost, and Ethan was thinking seriously about the winter preparation list he'd been building in his head since July. Clara, he discovered, had already started it. He came in one evening to find her at the table with a piece of paper covered in her neat, close handwriting. Columns of numbers and lists and notes in the margins. She pushed it across the table to him when he sat down. "Winter inventory," she said. "I went through everything we have and cross-referenced it against the winter length you described in your letters. We're short on 3 things." She pointed to the bottom of the page. "Salt lamp oil and the kind of heavy flour that stores properly in low temperature. Everything else we have enough of." He studied the list. It was thorough. It was more thorough than any inventory he had done himself, and he had been surviving Montana winters for 16 years. "You did this today," he said. "Yesterday and today. I wanted to finish before the first real snow." Clara, this would have taken me a week." "I'm faster with numbers than most people," she said without particular pride. "Just fact. My father taught me to keep accounts when I was 12. I've been doing it since." Her father. She mentioned him so rarely that the reference stopped Ethan like a hand on his shoulder. "He sounds like he was a practical man," Ethan said carefully. Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly. Just enough. "He was," she said. "In some ways." He waited. She didn't add anything, but she also didn't close the conversation the way she usually did when something moved too close to the things she wasn't ready to talk about. She just looked at the paper and was quiet, and Ethan had the distinct sense that she was deciding something not about the winter inventory, but about him. About how much she trusted him. He picked up the list. "I'll take this to the supply store in town Thursday," he said. "If Roy's heading that direction, we can share the wagon." She looked at him. The thing she had been deciding resolved itself into something quieter and harder to read. "Thank you," she said. "You did the work," he said. "That's not what I'm thanking you for." He met her eyes. He understood what she meant. He was thanking her for it too in his way, for the fact that she could mention her father without the whole conversation becoming about him, without Ethan pushing for more than she was ready to give. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she agreed. William Parker had the gift common to men who have spent decades doing physical labor alongside the same person of knowing when to say something and when to stay absolutely quiet. That gift had kept him employed on Ethan's ranch through some significant personal weather on Ethan's part, and it was the same gift that had kept him from saying anything about Clara for nearly 3 weeks after she arrived. 3 weeks and 2 days to be precise. Then he said something. They were working together in the barn on a Saturday afternoon, repairing the mechanism on the large hay storage door that had been sticking since August. It was the kind of work that didn't require much thinking, which meant the mind wandered, which was usually when William chose to speak. "She fixed the east pasture gate," William said. Ethan looked up. "What?" "The east pasture gate. The one you've been propping open with that rock since June because the hinge was giving trouble." William kept working. "She fixed it. Took apart the hinge, cleaned the corrosion, reset the pin. Did it while you were out checking the water line." Ethan stared at him. "She said nothing about it," Ethan said. "No," William said. "She didn't." Ethan thought about that. The gate had been on his list. Below the supply shed roof, below the wheel, bearing below the north fence. The rock had been doing its job, and there were always more urgent things. He had walked past that gate 100 times since June. "Why didn't she tell me she was going to do it?" Ethan said. William set down his tool and gave Ethan the look of a man addressing a question whose answer he considers obvious. "Because she didn't do it so you'd thank her," William said. "She did it because it needed doing, and she saw it needed doing. And she had 2 hours and the right tool." He picked his tool back up. "That's a particular kind of person, Ethan. Rarer than you'd think." Ethan went back to what he was working on. He didn't say anything else, but that evening at supper, he looked at Clara across the table and said without preamble, "The east pasture gate." She looked up. "That was good work," he said. She held his gaze for a second. "The hinge had been sitting wrong for a while. Wasn't hard to fix once I looked at it." "Still," he said. She went back to her meal. But there was something at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but the neighbor of one. After supper, when she was washing up, and Ethan was banking the fire for the night, he heard her humming quietly. Just barely. Barely loud enough to be sure it was real. A low, absent tune, the kind a person makes without knowing they're making it. He stood with his back to her, and felt something move in his chest that he couldn't quite put a name to. It took him several hours to identify it. It was the feeling of a house becoming a home. The first genuine test between them came on a Tuesday in mid-October, and it came from a direction neither of them expected. Roy Dawson arrived at the ranch just before the midday meal, and he didn't arrive alone. He brought with him a woman from town, Sarah Holt, whose husband ran the hardware store, and the specific energy of someone who has decided they're being helpful when the people they're helping have not asked for help. Ethan was out checking the cattle when Roy arrived. Clara was in the house. Sarah Holt wasted no time. Ethan heard the full version of it later from William, who had been visible in the barn and invisible to Roy and Sarah, which was William's particular talent. "She's very young to be managing a ranch this size," Sarah told Roy loudly, standing in the yard, with the confidence of a woman who considered herself an authority on other women's situations. "She seems capable enough," Roy said with less certainty than he probably intended. "Oh, capable." Sarah's tone made the word do a lot of work. "Of course she's capable. But a mail-order bride, Roy. You have to wonder what she's running from. Women don't answer those advertisements unless there's something in their past they'd rather not discuss." William said that Clara had been on the porch during all of this. She hadn't come out to greet the visitors. She had stood there and listened to the entire thing and said nothing. She said nothing, until Sarah walked around to the porch steps and looked up at her and said, "Well, honey, it must be quite an adjustment. Has Mr. Caldwell been patient with you? Men like him, they have their ways, and a woman from the city." "I'm from Dayton," Clara said. "Yes, well, and I'm not having trouble adjusting." Clara's voice was perfectly even, not cold, not angry, even the way a level carpenter's tool is even. "Thank you for your concern. I only mean that if you find it difficult, you shouldn't feel alone. There are women in town who understand what it's like to be—" "In what way?" Clara said. "Do you imagine that I need help?" Silence. "I beg your pardon. I'm asking sincerely," Clara said. "You've ridden 6 miles to tell me I might be having trouble adjusting. I'd like to understand specifically what trouble you're anticipating on my behalf." William said the silence that followed lasted about 8 seconds, which he described as the most enjoyable 8 seconds he'd spent in a long time. Roy cleared his throat. "We just wanted to make sure you were settled in." "I'm settled in," Clara said. "Would you like coffee? There's soup." She served them soup. She was polite. She was gracious. She asked Roy about his cattle and Sarah about her children, and she was so thoroughly, impeccably, deliberately normal that by the time they left an hour later, Sarah Holt looked vaguely uncomfortable in a way she probably couldn't have articulated. When Ethan came in for the midday meal, Clara had the food on the table and was sitting down as if nothing at all had happened. William caught Ethan's eye from the doorway and mouthed, "Ask her about the visitors." Ethan looked at Clara. "Roy came by," he said. "He did. He brought Mrs. Holt." Clara passed him the bread. "She was concerned I might be having difficulty adjusting. And I served them soup." She met his eyes. "I don't need to be worried about Ethan. I handled things on my own for a long time before I came here." He studied her face. The evening steadiness was there the way it always was. But underneath it, just barely, there was something that looked like old tiredness, the kind that comes from spending years managing other people's assumptions about you. "I know you did," he said. "I'm not fragile." "I know that too." She held his gaze for a moment. Then something in her shoulders, something she probably didn't even know was tense, let go by a fraction. "The soup is better than yesterday's," she said. "I believe it." They ate. That evening, William stopped Ethan on the way back to the barn. "I've been on this ranch 9 years, William said. "In 9 years, I have never once seen you handle a situation the way you just handled that one." "I didn't handle anything," Ethan said. "She handled it." "That's what I mean," William said. The second week of October brought the first serious cold, and with it, the particular kind of physical exhaustion that winter work on a cattle ranch produces, the kind that gets into your bones and stays there. Ethan came in later, and later in the evenings, as the list of cold weather preparations demanded more and more hours, and Clara adapted around it without being asked. Supper was ready later. The fire was kept higher. Hot coffee appeared at intervals she seemed to calibrate without being told. He noticed all of it. He tried not to let her see that he noticed, because noticing felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to put into words yet. One evening he came in so late that the supper dishes were already washed, and Clara was sitting in the main room with her mending the lamp turned low to save oil, and the fire burned down to comfortable coals. He thought she might have already gone to bed. He stood in the doorway of the main room and found her there, and the sight of her, just that ordinary sight, a woman sitting in a chair with lamplight on her hands, hit him somewhere behind his sternum like a physical thing. She looked up. "There's food in the pot," she said. "Thank you." He didn't move. She looked at him more carefully. "Ethan, sit down." "I'm filthy." "I've seen you filthy before. Sit down." He sat down. She got up without a word, came back with a bowl of food and a cup of coffee, set them in front of him, and sat back down with her mending. He ate. She worked. The fire settled. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can always ask me something," she said. "I might not answer, but you can ask." "Why Dayton?" He kept his voice easy. "You said you worked as a household manager. There must have been other options, other positions, other cities. Why answer an advertisement for Montana?" She kept her eyes on her mending for a long moment. "Because the other options would have kept me in the same place," she said. "What place is that?" Another pause. "A place where everyone already had an opinion of me," she said. "Where I walked into a room and people already knew or thought they knew who I was and what I was worth and what I was capable of." She pulled a thread through carefully. "Starting somewhere new means nobody knows anything about you yet. You're just a person." "And that appealed to you?" "Wouldn't it appeal to you?" He was quiet, thinking about a man who had moved to a remote ranch 6 miles outside a small town and spent 9 years making himself difficult to reach. "Yes," he said. "It would." She glanced up at him, and in her eyes, in that brief, careful glance, was the recognition of someone who has found, unexpectedly, a person who understands the exact shape of a thing they thought couldn't be explained. She looked back at her mending. He finished his food. The fire crackled once and settled lower. "I'll check the water line tomorrow," he said. "Could use a second pair of hands if you're free in the morning." "I'll be free," she said. He took his bowl to the kitchen and went to bed and lay in the dark, listening to the wind and the occasional quiet sound of her moving around the house, settling it for the night, and felt against every careful wall he had built the particular inconvenient, undeniable feeling of not wanting to be anywhere else. They checked the water line together the next morning, and the morning after that, she helped him move 3 months of winter hay into the reinforced storage section of the barn, and the morning after that, they worked side by side in the near cold, repairing the section of the north fence that had been weakening since the previous spring. Working together, Ethan discovered, was different from working with William. Not better or worse different. Clara worked the way she did everything without wasted motion, without complaint, without the need to narrate what she was doing. She handed him things before he asked for them. She spotted problems from angles he'd been standing too close to see. Twice in 3 days, she suggested approaches to a job that were better than the way he'd been planning to do it. And both times she suggested them quietly as questions, rather than corrections, leaving him the space to decide. "You know," he said on the third afternoon, pulling a fence post back to vertical while she tamped the ground around its base. "Most people I've worked with spend half their time telling me what they're about to do." "Does that help?" she said. "Never." "Then I won't do it." He held the post and she worked, and the cold afternoon pressed down around them, and he was comfortable in it in a way he hadn't been comfortable in cold outdoor work since he couldn't remember when. "Clara," he said. "I want you to know." He stopped, tried again. "This ranch. It's different. Since you came." She kept working. "Different how?" He thought about it honestly. "Like someone opened a window," he said, "in a house that had been closed up for too long." She stopped tamping. She was quiet for a moment, crouched there by the fence post with her hands in the cold ground. "That's the kindest thing you've said to me," she said. I'm not good at kind things. I know. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her hands, looked at him directly. That's why it meant something. They stood there in the cold, with the afternoon going gray around them, too close to say something comfortable, and too far to say something honest, and then a gust of wind came off the mountain, and Clara said practically, "The next post is 30 feet east," and walked toward it. Ethan watched her for a second. Then he followed. The letters from Ohio kept coming. One every 2 weeks or so, sometimes more frequently. Always the same return address, always the same law office in Dayton. Clara received them, read them privately, and said nothing about their contents. Ethan said nothing either. But on a Thursday in late October, something changed. He was coming back from town with the supplies from Clara's winter inventory list when he passed the post office, and the postmaster, a careful older man named Morris, called out to him, "Mr. Caldwell, letter came for your wife. Came from a different address this time, not the Dayton law office. Return address says Whitmore Financial, Cincinnati." Ethan took the letter. He looked at it in the wagon on the way home. Whitmore Financial, Cincinnati. He thought about the first letter he had accidentally seen. The Whitmore inquiry into your whereabouts. He brought it home and set it on the table and didn't say anything until that evening when Clara sat down across from him and saw it there. He watched her face change. Not dramatically, not obviously, but he knew her expressions now well enough to see it, the slight drawing in, the careful stillness that meant something had reached her somewhere she kept protected. "It came to the post office," he said. "Morris handed it to me directly." "I see." Her voice was neutral. Her hands on the table were very still. "Clara." He waited until she looked at him. "Whatever this is, it's found you here, which means it's not going to stay at arm's length much longer." She looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she said, "Richard Whitmore is a businessman from Cincinnati. He was a close associate of my father's." She stopped. "Go on," Ethan said. "My father died 8 months ago." She said it straight and flat, the way people say things they have rehearsed saying without emotion because they can't afford the emotion. He left behind certain financial interests, a significant estate. Ethan went very still. "Richard has been handling the estate," Clara continued, "or claiming to handle it. I have reason to believe that his management of my father's accounts is not accurate." "You think he's stealing from your inheritance?" Ethan said. "I think he has been stealing from it for years," Clara said. "And I think he knows I know. And I think that's why he has been trying to find me." The kitchen was completely quiet. Ethan looked at her. Really looked at her, at the woman who had come to his ranch with one suitcase and a practical handshake, and proceeded to fix everything she could reach, and who had been carrying this the whole time, carrying it quietly and completely alone. "How much?" he said. She told him. The number was large enough that Ethan sat back in his chair. "Clara," he said. "I know what it is," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "I didn't come here for money, Ethan. I left it behind. I left everything behind because I didn't want to be the woman with the inheritance. I wanted to be—" She stopped. "I wanted to be someone who was valued for something other than what she owned." The fire burned. The wind pressed the house. "You are," Ethan said. She looked at him. "You are that person," he said. "You've been that person since the day you stepped off that stage." Her eyes didn't change exactly, but something behind them did something that had been held very tightly loosened, just slightly, just enough. "He's going to come here," she said. "I think that's what this letter is. He's found out where I am." "Let him come," Ethan said. "Ethan, Clara." His voice was quiet, but there was nothing uncertain in it. "This is your home. Whatever follows you here, we deal with it together. That's what a partnership means." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something he hadn't seen her do since she arrived. Her eyes filled not with tears, exactly more with the precursor to them, the moment before the decision of whether to let something show. She made her decision. She held it back. She was Clara Bennett, and she managed herself. But he had seen it, and she knew he had seen it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. "All right," she said quietly. "Together." The letter confirmed what Clara suspected. Richard Whitmore was coming to Montana. His letter was polite, on the surface formal, and reasonable, dressed up in the language of concern and legal obligation. Underneath it was a threat wearing the clothes of an invitation. "There are matters regarding your father's estate that require your attention and your personal presence. I have taken considerable effort to locate you and would appreciate the courtesy of a meeting at your earliest convenience. I will be traveling west within the month." Clara read it aloud to Ethan at the kitchen table, her voice steady the whole way through. When she finished, Ethan said, "What exactly does he want from you?" "My signature." She set the letter down. "There are documents, transfer documents, things that would legally shift the remainder of the estate into his control permanently. He needs me to sign them." "And you don't intend to?" "I have never intended to." A pause. "He knows that, which is why he's coming in person rather than sending another lawyer's letter." "What does he think will happen when he gets here?" She was quiet for a moment. "He thinks he'll be able to persuade me. He has always been able to persuade people. He's very good at seeming reasonable, at making the thing he wants seem like the sensible thing, the logical thing, the thing that's best for everyone." She paused. "He convinced my father to trust him with the entire management of the estate when my father was sick. He's good at what he does." "But he doesn't know you anymore," Ethan said. She looked at him. "The person he knew," Ethan said, "was in Dayton alone without options. That's not where you are now." Something shifted in her expression, something that was almost carefully beginning to resemble hope. "No," she said, "it isn't." He looked at her across the table, at the woman who had reorganized his kitchen and fixed his gate and filled his quiet house with soup smells and quiet humming and winter inventory lists and the specific stubborn competence of someone who refused to be anything other than exactly who she was. "We have time before he arrives," Ethan said. "Use it. Get the documents you need. Whatever evidence you have about what he's done. When he comes here, you won't be facing him alone." She looked at him for a long moment. "Ethan," she said, "why are you doing this?" He held her gaze. "Because you fixed my gate," he said. She stared at him. "And my supply shed roof," he said. "And my east pasture fence. And you made soup for William when he was cold, even though nobody asked you to." He paused. "And because I have spent the last month watching you take care of everything and everyone on this ranch, and it's past time someone did the same for you." In the quiet of the kitchen, with the October wind pressing against the walls and the fire burning low, Clara Bennett looked at Ethan Caldwell, and something in her face that had been carefully composed for a very long time came quietly undone. She didn't cry. She was Clara. She didn't do that easily. But her face changed the way a locked room changes when someone finally opens it and lets the air in. "Thank you," she said. And this time, the words carried the weight of everything she hadn't said in months. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Whitmore's not here yet." She almost smiled. Almost. But it was enough. Outside, the October wind shifted, coming harder off the mountains, the kind of shift that meant the real cold was close now, the serious Montana winter that tested everything it touched. And inside the small house on Caldwell Ranch, something that had started as a practical arrangement was becoming quietly and completely, and without either of them having planned it, something else entirely. Something that neither of them had a name for yet. But both of them felt it. And it was the most frightening and necessary thing either of them had known in years. Richard Whitmore arrived on a Wednesday. Ethan knew he was coming before he saw him because word traveled fast in Black Pine Creek, and Morris at the post office had a gift for observation that made him more useful than any telegraph wire. A man in a good suit had come in on the Tuesday stage. Morris sent word via Roy's youngest boy, and he was asking directions to the Caldwell Ranch before his bags were off the coach. Ethan told Clara at breakfast. She set down her coffee cup, picked it up again, set it down a second time. "How long do we have?" she said. He'll need to arrange transport from town. A day, maybe two, if he can't hire a wagon quickly. Then I need to show you something, she said. She went to her room. He heard her moving around the sound of something being pulled from beneath the floorboard near the east wall, a sound he had noticed before and never commented on. She came back with a flat wooden box, the kind that might hold sewing supplies or personal letters, and set it on the table in front of him. Inside were documents. Letters, ledger pages, copies of account records, all of it organized with Clara's characteristic precision, dated arranged chronologically, annotated in the margins in her small, careful handwriting. "My father's accounts," she said. "The real ones. The ones Richard doesn't know I have copies of." Ethan picked up the first page. He was not a financial man by training, but he was a man who had managed a ranch's accounts for 16 years, and he knew what honest numbers looked like versus numbers that had been arranged to tell a particular story. These numbers had been arranged. "How long has he been doing this?" Ethan said. "At least 4 years." Clara sat down across from him. "Probably longer, but the earliest records I could access only go back 4 years. He was skimming from estate accounts while my father was still alive. Small amounts at first, the kind that could be explained as administrative costs. Then larger, then this." She pointed to a column near the bottom of one page. "He transferred a significant portion of the liquid assets into a company he controls. On paper, it looks like a legitimate investment, but the company doesn't operate. It's a shell. The money went directly to him. This would destroy him in court," Ethan said. "Yes, if I can get it in front of the right judge." She paused. "Richard knows I have some of this. He doesn't know how much. He's coming here because he thinks he can convince me to hand over what I have in exchange for a settlement, something that looks generous on the surface, but keeps him safe from prosecution. And if you don't agree—" Her jaw set slightly. "Then he'll try something else. He's not a man who accepts the word no." Ethan looked at her across the documents spread between them. He thought about the Clara Bennett who had stepped off a stage in September with one suitcase and steady eyes and no visible fear, and he understood for the first time the full context of that steadiness. She hadn't been unafraid. She had been afraid, and had chosen to come anyway because Montana was far from Ohio, and far from Richard Whitmore, and far from being the woman with the inheritance that everyone wanted a piece of. "He won't be able to operate the same way here," Ethan said. "Why not?" "Because here nobody knows him." Ethan closed the box and pushed it back toward her. "In Cincinnati and Dayton, he has reputation, he has relationships, he has the kind of social standing that makes people assume he's right before he opens his mouth." He met her eyes. "He has none of that here. Here he's just a man in a good suit who came a long way to pressure a woman on her own property." Something in Clara's expression shifted. Something that had been braced for a long time shifted forward, almost imperceptibly, toward something like fight. "You think that matters?" she said. "I think it's the only thing that matters," Ethan said. "Come to my ground, play by my rules." She looked at him. He held her gaze. And for the first time since the letter arrived, she breathed all the way out. "All right," she said. "Then we wait." Richard Whitmore arrived the next afternoon. Ethan heard the wagon from the barn and walked out into the yard to meet it. He hadn't discussed with Clara exactly how to handle the arrival. They didn't need to. He had simply said that morning, "I'll be in the yard when he comes," and she had nodded and said, "Good." And that had been the entirety of the strategy discussion. The hired wagon from town pulled up, and a man climbed down, and Ethan's first impression was that Richard Whitmore was exactly what Clara had described in a way that was immediately visible to the eye. He was perhaps 50 well-dressed in the way that was meant to signal something about himself, with the kind of face that arranged itself naturally into expressions of reasonable concern. He looked like a man who was very accustomed to being the most credible person in any room. He looked at Ethan and smiled warmly, the practiced warmth of someone who has spent decades building relationships they intended to use. "Mr. Caldwell, I presume," he said, extending his hand. "Richard Whitmore. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I hope this isn't a poor time. Ethan shook his hand once. It's fine, he said. Clara's inside. Something moved in Whitmore's eyes, just barely. He had expected more preamble, more social navigation, more of the back and forth that would have let him establish his footing. Ethan had cut straight through to the point, and Whitmore didn't quite know how to adjust. Wonderful, Whitmore said. I've come a considerable distance, and I'm sure we can resolve this matter to everyone's satisfaction. We'll see, Ethan said, and walked him to the door. Yes, Clara was at the kitchen table when they came in. She had positioned herself there deliberately. Ethan understood that without being told. She was on her ground in her chair in her home, and she stood up when they entered, but she stood up slowly, on her own timeline, the way a person stands when they have nothing to apologize for. Clara. Whitmore's warmth stepped forward first before he did. My goodness, you look well. Richard. Her voice was perfectly even. Sit down. He sat. Ethan stood near the door, arms loose at his sides in the posture of a man who is simply present and has all the time in the world. Whitmore looked between them. He recalibrated visibly briefly and then turned to Clara with the expression of a man who has decided to open with concern rather than business. I was worried about you, he said. When you left Dayton so suddenly, without telling anyone, without leaving an address. I left a letter with my attorney, Clara said, a very brief one. It said everything I needed to say. Whitmore settled back slightly. He folded his hands on the table, the gesture of a man preparing to be patient and reasonable. Clara, your father entrusted me with the management of his estate because he believed I had your best interests at heart. What I'm asking is simply that you allow me to continue in that role. The transfer documents are straightforward. They protect the estate's assets while ensuring. They transfer control to you permanently, Clara said. They ensure Richard. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I've read every document you've sent. I've had them reviewed by 2 independent attorneys. They transfer full control to you and eliminate my ability to audit or challenge any subsequent management decisions. She looked at him. Tell me which word in that sentence is inaccurate. The warmth in Whitmore's face didn't disappear. It changed quality. It became the kind of warmth that is slightly too deliberate to be comfortable. You've always been a sharp girl, he said. Your father said so constantly. My father also trusted you with his accounts, Clara said. We can talk about how that worked out. Ethan watched Whitmore's face. The man was good. He was genuinely good at this, at keeping his expression steady and reasonable while his eyes did their adjusting. But there was a moment, a fraction of a second, when something behind his eyes went cold. I came a long way, Whitmore said. I'd like to think we can have a civilized conversation about this. We're having one, Clara said. I'm telling you no. That's a civilized answer. Clara. The transfer documents, no. Any arrangement that removes my ability to access my father's original account records, no. Any settlement that requires me to sign away legal recourse, no. She said each one flatly, clearly, without heat. If you've come all this way for one of those things, you've had a long trip for nothing. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Ethan, and the shift was as deliberate as a chess move. He was trying to find new footing, a different angle, a crack in the wall that Clara wasn't presenting him. Mr. Caldwell, he said with a kind of man-to-man reasonableness. I understand you're new to this situation. Clara has always been. She has strong opinions, and I respect that. But this is a complicated financial matter with a long history, and I wonder if you fully appreciate what's at stake. Tell me, Ethan said. Whitmore blinked. He had expected resistance, or discomfort, or perhaps a husband stepping back from another man's business. He had not expected simple, direct invitation to continue. Clara's inheritance is significant, Whitmore said. Improperly managed, it could be tied up in courts for years. What I'm offering is a resolution. A clean transfer that protects the assets and gives everyone certainty. Certainty for who? Ethan said. For Clara. For the estate. You mentioned the estate twice and Clara once, Ethan said. Try it the other way around. The room was very quiet. Whitmore looked at him, recalibrated again. The warmth in his face settled into something cooler, something that was no longer bothering to be warm, and for the first time Ethan felt like he was seeing the actual man rather than the performance. I think, Whitmore said carefully, that there are aspects of this situation that Clara has not fully disclosed to you. Then disclose them, Ethan said. Whitmore paused. Clara left Dayton under circumstances that were complicated. There are obligations, commitments her father made on her behalf that she has not fully honored. The estate has liabilities that she... Stop. Clara's voice was quiet and absolute. Whitmore stopped. Don't, she said. She looked at him across the table with an expression that was completely clear and completely controlled. Don't do that. I'm only... You're lying, she said. There are no liabilities. There are no commitments made on my behalf. There is only money you've been taking for 4 years, and a woman you thought you could intimidate into silence because she was alone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I'm not alone. The three of them stayed in that silence for a moment. Then Whitmore smiled. It was a different kind of smile, not the warm arrival smile, not the reasonable man smile. Something with more patience in it and less kindness. Well, he said, I see we have a great deal to discuss. He stood up. I've arranged to stay at the boarding house in town. I'd like to continue this conversation tomorrow, when we've all had time to think. He looked at Clara. All of it. He walked to the door. Ethan held it open. Whitmore stepped through and then paused, turning back with one hand on the doorframe. Mr. Caldwell, he said, you're a ranching man. You understand investment. Opportunity. His eyes moved to Clara for just a fraction of a second, then back. Make sure you understand exactly what you've married into. Ethan looked at him steadily. I know exactly what I've married into, he said. I'm the luckiest man in Black Pine Creek. He held Whitmore's gaze. Come back tomorrow if you want, but the answer will be the same. Whitmore left. Ethan shut the door. He turned around. Clara was still at the table, her hands flat on the surface, her breathing controlled and deliberate. Are you all right? He said. Yes. She looked up. Something in her eyes was a little brighter than usual, a little sharper, the particular energy of someone who has finally stopped waiting for a confrontation and is standing in the middle of it. He's going to try something else. I know. He didn't come all this way just to be told no and go home. No, Ethan agreed. He didn't. He sat down across from her. What's his next move? She thought about it. He'll try to find someone in town who knows our situation. He'll ask questions. He'll try to build a picture of us. She said the word with only a slight hesitation. He'll look for anything he can use as leverage, any vulnerability. She paused. He's very good at finding vulnerabilities. Then we make sure there aren't any, Ethan said. She looked at him. Ethan, the town already has questions about me, about this marriage. Sarah Holt. Sarah Holt talks to everyone, including Roy, and Roy is my neighbor of 15 years, Ethan said. Whatever Whitmore finds in town, it won't be what he's looking for. She studied his face. You sound very certain, she said. I am certain. He met her eyes. This is our home, Clara. He doesn't get to come here and make us doubt that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over his on the table just briefly. Just for a second, then withdrew it. But the touch stayed with him long after she moved. I need to write to my attorney in Dayton, she said. Tonight. He needs to know Whitmore is here. I'll ride to town first thing tomorrow and send it by telegraph, Ethan said. Faster than the mail. Thank you. That's the third time you've thanked me this week. I'll keep thanking you until it stops being necessary. It was never necessary, he said quietly. She looked at him, and the look lasted a beat longer than it needed to. "Write your letter," he said. "I'll check the horses." Sheg. He didn't go check the horses. He went to the barn and stood in the dark with his hand on the neck of his oldest mare and breathed through something that had no clean name. He was angry, not the hot reactive kind of anger, but the deep structural kind. The kind that comes from watching someone try to undo a person you had come to value beyond any clean accounting. Whitmore had sat at his table and lied with the comfortable fluency of a man who had been doing it so long he no longer noticed the seams. And Whitmore had looked at Clara as though she were a problem to be managed rather than a person to be reckoned with. That particular look had ignited something in Ethan's chest that he recognized from a great distance as what it felt like to be protective of someone you cared about. He stood in the barn and let himself acknowledge it for the first time completely and without the usual careful qualification. He cared about Clara Bennett. He cared about her the way a man cares when the thought of something happening to someone makes the whole world narrow down to a single, non-negotiable point. He was not going to let Richard Whitmore take anything from her. Not the estate, not her safety, not one single day more of the quiet life she had come to Montana to build. He went back inside. Clara was at the table writing her letter. Her head bent, her handwriting small and precise in the lamplight. She didn't look up. He sat down and opened his account books, and they worked in silence for 2 hours, side by side, the way they had learned to be together, not needing noise to fill the space, not needing to perform ease because the ease was real. When she finally put down her pen and stretched her hands, she said, "It's a good letter." "Read it to me," he said. She looked at him surprised. "If it's being sent on my Telegraph account, I should know what it says," he said. A pause. And 2 sets of eyes. She read it to him. It was, as she said, a good letter, clear, factual, without emotion, and therefore more damning than any emotional account could have been. She laid out what Whitmore was doing, what she needed from her attorney in terms of next steps. "Add one thing," Ethan said when she finished. "What?" "That you have the original account documents. Not copies, the originals. If you have them." She looked at him. "I do. Some of them." "Why does that matter?" "Because if Whitmore knows you have originals, he can't claim they were altered or forged after the fact." He held her gaze. "He needs to know that you have what you have before he decides what his next move is. Right now, he's guessing about how strong your position is. Take away the guessing." Clara stared at him for a long moment. "You're good at this," she said. "I've been negotiating cattle prices with men who didn't want to pay what something was worth for 16 years, he said. "Same principles." She added the line, folded the letter. Then she looked at him with the expression she had when she was deciding something. "Ethan," she said. What he said, before he left. She met his eyes directly. "About making sure you understood what you'd married into." "I heard him. He was implying that you didn't know about the money, about the estate." She paused. "You didn't know. When you wrote to the agency, you didn't know any of this." "No," he said. "Does it?" She stopped, started differently. "Does it change anything?" Knowing now. The question sat between them in the lamplight. He understood what she was really asking. Not whether it changed his feelings about the estate, whether it changed his feelings about her, whether knowing she was wealthy made her different to him than the woman who fixed his gate and made soup for his ranch hand and stood in his kitchen at 4 a.m. because she couldn't sleep. "No," he said. "Ethan, Clara." His voice was quiet but completely certain. "I didn't write to that agency looking for a fortune. I wrote because my house was too quiet." He looked at her. "The quiet is gone. That's what I have. The money is yours. It has nothing to do with what's in this kitchen." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she folded her hands on the table and looked at them. "I have spent 4 years," she said quietly, "being very careful about who I trusted, being careful about what I said and what I showed, and what I let people close to." A pause. "I haven't been careful with you." "Is that a problem?" he said. She looked up. No, she said. That's what frightens me. The fire crackled. The wind moved outside. Go to bed, Clara, he said gently. Tomorrow's going to be a hard day. She stood up. She took her letter. At the door she stopped. Thank you, she said, for what you said to him. Which part? The luckiest man in Black Pine Creek. She looked at him with something complicated and honest in her expression. You didn't have to say that. No, he said. I didn't. She went to bed. He sat for a long time at the table in the dying firelight. What Ethan had not told Clara was that he had, while Whitmore was at the table, been paying careful attention not to what Whitmore said, but to what he didn't say. A man who lies for a living reveals more in his omissions than his statements, and Whitmore had very carefully never mentioned the specific documents Clara had. He had talked around them. He had implied he knew what she possessed without stating it directly, which meant he was uncertain, which meant Clara's position was stronger than Whitmore was letting on. Ethan was up before 4 the next morning, not from the alarm of routine, but from the particular alertness of a man who has identified a problem and is working through it. He had the coffee made and was at the table with Clara's box of documents before the house was fully light. He read through them for 2 hours, for he was not a lawyer. He did not need to be. He had enough understanding of accounts and enough years of honest business practice to follow the trail Clara had laid out in her annotations, and by the time Clara appeared in the kitchen at 5:30, the picture was clear to him. I know what he's most afraid of, Ethan said without preamble when she came in. She stopped. This, he said, holding up one specific page. This transfer record. The one to the shell company. This one has his personal signature on it, not a proxy or a clerk. He signed off on this transfer personally. Every other transaction in here, he has some distance from it. But this one, he set it down. If this gets in front of a judge, there's no explanation that saves him. Clara sat down slowly. I know, she said. That's the one I've been most careful with. He's going to ask for it specifically today. I know that too. Don't give it to him. I wasn't going to give him anything. Don't mention it. Don't confirm you have it. Don't deny it. He looked at her. Let him guess. She studied him. You've been up since 3, she said. How do you know? Because the coffee is made the way you make it when you've been sitting with something for a long time. Too strong. She got up and got 2 cups and poured them both. I've been up since 2. He looked at her. I know what he's going to do, she said. She sat back down. He's going to go to town today and talk to people. He's going to find out what he can about this marriage about us, about whether it's real. She wrapped her hands around her cup. And then he's going to come back and use whatever he finds. What does he think he'll find? Ethan said. He thinks this marriage is convenient. She met his eyes. He thinks I married you to hide, to make myself harder to reach. He thinks if he can demonstrate that this is an arrangement of convenience and not a real marriage, he can argue that I'm unstable, that my decisions since my father's death have been erratic, that I need someone to manage my affairs on my behalf. The kitchen was very quiet. That's his legal strategy, Ethan said slowly. That's why he needs you to sign the transfers. If you don't, he tries to have you declared unable to manage your own estate. Yes. On what grounds? That I fled Ohio, abandoned my father's estate, entered into a hasty mail-order marriage with a stranger, and have been living in a remote location, refusing reasonable legal contact. She said it with careful, flat precision. On paper, to a judge who doesn't know me, it sounds like the behavior of someone who is not thinking clearly. Ethan stared at her. He came here hoping to find exactly what he expected, he said. A woman in a marriage of convenience, a husband who barely knows her, something that confirms his story. Yes. And instead he found... He stopped. Instead he found this, Clara said quietly. She didn't define what this was. She didn't need to. Which is why he looked at you the way he did before he left. He was recalculating. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then we show him he hasn't recalculated enough, Ethan said. She looked at him. What do you mean? He wants to find a marriage of convenience, a woman who ran, and a man who didn't know what he was getting into. He held her gaze. So we give him the opposite. How? By being exactly what we are, Ethan said. Whatever that is. The words landed between them in the quiet kitchen. Whatever that is. Neither of them named it. Neither of them had named it yet. But in the space the words left behind, the truth of it sat as clearly as anything in the account books on the table, real and documented and impossible to argue with. Oh. Roy arrived mid-morning, which surprised no one who knew Roy. He had heard via the unaccountable information network that operated through Morris at the post office and the general store and apparently thin air that a man in a good suit had been asking questions in Black Pine Creek. He sat down at the kitchen table with the authority of a man who lives next door, accepted coffee from Clara, and said to Ethan, "What do you want me to do?" Ethan looked at him. About what? About the Cincinnati man who spent an hour in the hardware store yesterday, asking delicate questions about Clara's background and the circumstances of your marriage. Clara set down her coffee cup. What kind of questions? She said. Whether the marriage was quick, Roy said. Whether you seemed settled. Whether Ethan knew you before the arrangement. Whether people in town thought the whole thing was unusual. He looked at Clara directly without apology. He found Sarah Holt. The kitchen was very still. What did Sarah say? Ethan said. I don't know exactly, but I know Sarah and I know she thinks she was being helpful. Roy turned his cup in his hands. She told him she'd had concerns, that a mail-order marriage seemed unusual, that she'd wanted to check on Clara when she first arrived. He paused. She meant well. I know she did, Clara said. Her voice was steady. Whatever she said, this man is going to use it, Roy said. He's going to try, Ethan said. Ethan? Roy leaned forward. I've known you 15 years. I've watched you build this ranch. I've watched you be decent and stubborn and occasionally impossible, and I have never once seen you do something dishonest. He paused. I am telling you right now that if there is something I can do to help this situation, you need to tell me, because that man asked questions about your wife in my town, and I am not inclined to let that stand. Ethan looked at Roy, at the broad, loud, relentlessly decent man who had brought pamphlets and coffee and opinions to his kitchen for 15 years without being asked. Actually, Ethan said, there is something. Whitmore came back that afternoon. He drove himself this time, no hired wagon, and he came in with the energy of a man who felt he had found better footing overnight. Clara was in the yard when he arrived. So was Ethan. So was William Parker, who had reasons of his own to be nearby. And standing at the fence with the comfortable proprietary ease of someone who belonged there was Roy Dawson. Whitmore registered all four of them and recalibrated again. Clara, he said pleasantly, I was hoping we might speak privately. Whatever you have to say to me, Clara said, you can say in front of my husband and our people. Our people. She said it simply as a fact. Whitmore smiled. Of course. He looked at Ethan. Mr. Caldwell, I've had some time to think, and I want to be direct with you. I think Clara has given you an incomplete picture of her situation back home. The estate is in a delicate position, the decisions she's been making. I've read the account records, Ethan said. Whitmore paused. Excuse me. The ones she brought from Ohio, the ones showing the transfers, all 4 years of them. Ethan kept his voice completely easy, particularly the one with your personal signature. The silence that fell was a different kind of silence than anything that had come before. Whitmore's face did not change. He was too good for that. But his eyes changed. They went sharp and still, the way an animal's do when it realizes the ground beneath it is not what it appeared. Those records, Whitmore said carefully, have been taken out of context. I'd like to hear the context, Ethan said. This isn't the appropriate setting for a detailed, Then find an appropriate one, Ethan said, because Clara's attorney in Dayton received a telegraph this morning. He's already contacted the financial authorities in Ohio. He paused, watching Whitmore's face. You've got about 2 weeks before this stops being a conversation you can manage. For the first time since he arrived, Richard Whitmore looked exactly like what he was, a man who had believed he held all the cards and had just discovered the table had been rearranged while he wasn't watching. You don't understand what you're involving yourself in, Whitmore said. His voice had dropped the warmth entirely. He was speaking to Ethan as he might speak to an obstacle he was calculating how to remove. I understand it fine, Ethan said. You came here to pressure a woman you thought was isolated and without resources. You found something different. That's your problem, not ours. Whitmore looked at Clara, and in that look, that particular look stripped of all the reasonable man performance, Clara saw exactly what Ethan had meant when he said Whitmore had nothing here. In Cincinnati and Dayton, in the rooms where he had always operated, that look would have meant something. Here on a Montana ranch, surrounded by people who had no reason to defer to him, it was just a look. This isn't over, Whitmore said. No, Clara agreed. It isn't, but it will be. She held his gaze without blinking. Go back to Cincinnati, Richard. Talk to your own lawyers. Because what I have is going in front of a judge, and it's going with or without your cooperation. The only choice you have left is how much of your own money you want to spend on the part that comes next. Whitmore looked between them one more time. Then he got back in the wagon and drove back toward town. The yard was quiet. William let out a slow breath. Roy said, "Well, that was satisfying." Clara stood absolutely still for a moment. Then something went out of her, the rigid, controlled, maintained composure of a woman who had been preparing for this confrontation for months. Her shoulders came down an inch. Her hands opened at her sides. Ethan stepped up beside her. He didn't touch her. He just stood next to her, close enough that she could feel the solidity of him, the simple physical fact that he was there. "It's not finished," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "I know," he said. "He'll fight it. He will. This could take months. It could get ugly." She turned to look at him. "It's going to become very public. People will talk about the estate, about my father, about me, about this." Her eyes searched his. "About whether this marriage is real." Ethan looked back at her. "Is it?" he said quietly. She held his gaze. And in the pause before she answered, in that particular pause in the October yard, with the cold coming off the mountains and Roy and William pretending to look in other directions, something shifted between them that had been building since a September afternoon, when a woman with one suitcase had looked at him and said she believed they'd agreed to an honest arrangement. "Yes," she said, "it is." Something in Ethan's chest settled, not with the relief of something resolved, but with the certainty of something finally named. "Then there's nothing he can touch," Ethan said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the house, and he walked beside her, and neither of them said anything else, because neither of them needed to. Behind them, Roy Dawson looked at William Parker with the expression of a man who has been right about something for a long time and is enjoying the view. William shook his head slowly and went back to the barn, but he was smiling. Whitmore didn't leave Black Pine Creek. Ethan found that out the following morning when Roy rode over before breakfast with the look of a man carrying news he didn't enjoy delivering. "He's still at the boarding house," Roy said, accepting coffee from Clara with a nod. "Spent last evening in the saloon talking to anyone who'd listen. Bought rounds. Very generous man when he wants something." "What was he saying?" Ethan said. "That he's Clara's family's oldest friend. That he's deeply concerned about her welfare. That he traveled all this way because her father's dying wish was that she be looked after properly." Roy set down his cup. "He's building something. I don't know exactly what yet, but he's building it." Clara stood at the stove with her back to them, and Ethan could see from the set of her shoulders that she had already known this was coming. Not this specific thing, but the shape of it. Whitmore settling in, laying groundwork, working the social landscape the way he worked every landscape. "He's not going to leave," she said. She turned around. "Not until he has what he came for or he's run out of moves. That's how he operates. He doesn't lose gracefully. Then we don't give him time to build, Ethan said. The attorney in Dayton received my telegraph, Clara said. He's moving, but legal processes take time, weeks, possibly longer. She looked at Ethan. In the meantime, Richard is going to keep talking to people in this town. Let him talk, Roy said. This is my town. I've been here 30 years. I know every person in it and they know me. Whatever he's selling, I can counter it. Roy, I'm serious, Clara. Roy's voice was firm in the way of a man who doesn't offer things he doesn't mean. You let me worry about Black Pine Creek. You worry about the legal side. Clara looked at him. Something moved in her expression, the specific, slightly surprised look of someone who keeps expecting to navigate alone and keeps finding that they don't have to. Thank you, Roy, she said. Don't thank me, just win. He stood up and put on his hat. I'm going to have a conversation with Morris at the post office and another one with Judge Harlan's clerk. The judge is a fair man. He won't like what he hears about this Whitmore character if it's presented correctly. He looked at Ethan. You have everything you need. Clara has the documents, Ethan said. Then use them. Roy walked to the door. Don't wait for him to make the next move. Make yours first. He left. The kitchen was quiet. Clara turned back to the stove, then turned around again immediately the way she did when she was thinking hard. He's right, she said. We've been reactive, waiting for Richard to come to us, waiting to see what he does next. She met Ethan's eyes. I need to go to town. Today. I need to speak to the clerk of courts. I need to find out what it would take to file a formal petition here in Montana rather than waiting for the Ohio courts. If I file here first, it changes the legal geography. Richard's attorneys are in Cincinnati and Dayton. Mine are there too, but I have the documents and I have residence here now. She was thinking out loud, quick and clear. She was thinking out, the way she did when a problem had resolved itself into its component parts, and she could see the structure of it. Montana jurisdiction complicates everything for him. He'd have to fight on two fronts. Ethan looked at her. Get your coat, he said. She blinked. Now, you said today. Yes, but... Clara. He stood up. Get your coat. I'll have the wagon ready in 10 minutes. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went and got her coat. The ride into Black Pine Creek was faster than usual. Ethan pushed the horses harder than his habit, and Clara sat beside him on the wagon seat, with the flat wooden box of documents on her lap, and the look of a woman running calculations in her head. He let her run them. He didn't try to fill the silence with reassurance she hadn't asked for. That was something he had learned about her in 2 months. Clara Bennett did not want to be soothed. She wanted to be taken seriously. He took her seriously. They went to the clerk of courts first. The clerk was a precise man named Garrett, 40 years old, who had the careful manner of someone who understood that his job was to know the law and not to have opinions about the people who came to use it. Clara set 3 documents on his desk and explained what she needed with the same flat, factual clarity she had used at the kitchen table. Garrett read the documents. His expression didn't change, but he read them twice. This is a significant matter, he said. Yes, Clara said, it is. And you're saying you have additional records of this nature? Considerably more. Garrett set the papers down carefully. Montana territorial courts have jurisdiction over disputes involving residents of the territory. If you file a petition here as a resident, it becomes a matter of local record. He paused. It doesn't supersede Ohio jurisdiction, but it creates a parallel proceeding that would require your associate to respond in 2 venues simultaneously. Which is expensive, Clara said, and time-consuming. Both. Garrett agreed. He looked at her. I'll need the full set of documents. Authenticated copies, not originals. I have them, Clara said. I can have everything organized and on your desk by tomorrow morning. Garrett looked at Ethan briefly, then back at Clara. Mrs. Caldwell, what you're describing, if it holds up, and from what I can see is a serious criminal matter, not just a civil dispute." "I know," Clara said. "That changes the nature of—" "I know what it changes," Clara said. "File the petition." Garrett looked at her for a moment. Then he reached for the form. Outside the clerk's office on the wooden walkway in the cold November air, Ethan stopped walking and looked at her. "Criminal," he said. "I told you it was serious. You said significant. You didn't say criminal." She met his eyes. "Would it have changed anything?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. She nodded as though she had known that. "He didn't just mismanage the estate, Ethan. He stole from it while my father was dying, while my father trusted him completely and was too sick to review the accounts himself." Her voice stayed even, but something underneath it had an edge to it, old and sharp and patient. "I want him held accountable, not settled with, not managed, accountable." "Then that's what we do," Ethan said. She looked at him. "It's going to get complicated. Already complicated." "More complicated," she said. "He's going to find out about the filing within days. When he does, he'll accelerate whatever he's building here. He'll try to discredit me, discredit the documents, discredit—" She stopped. "Discredit this marriage," Ethan said. Yes, they stood on the walkway in the cold, and Ethan looked down the main street of Black Pine Creek, the hardware store where Whitmore had bought rounds the night before the boarding house, where he was still sleeping, the post office, where Morris had already heard more about their business than either of them had intended. "Let him try," Ethan said. He tried. The first indication came 2 days later when William came in for the midday meal with the particular expression of a man who has heard something he is trying to decide how to present. "Spit it out," Ethan said. William sat down. "There's talk," he said, "in town, about the marriage." He glanced at Clara, then back at Ethan. "Someone is suggesting, and I want to be clear, that nobody I respect is suggesting this, that the marriage was a legal arrangement rather than a real one. That Clara needed a Montana residence quickly, and that the whole thing was a transaction." Clara set down her fork. "Who's suggesting it?" Ethan said. "Can't pin it to one person. It's just in the air. The way things get when someone's been putting them there carefully." William looked uncomfortable. "Morris said a man matching Whitmore's description had a long conversation with the new minister's wife, who is relatively new to town and doesn't know the history." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Clara pushed back her chair. "I'm going to town," she said. "Clara, not to confront anyone." She was already getting her coat. "I'm going to have tea with Sarah Holt." Ethan stared at her. Sarah Holt talks to everyone." Clara said exactly as he had said it weeks ago, returning it to him with the precision of a woman who listened to everything and forgot nothing. "And she means well. You said so yourself." She buttoned her coat. "She made assumptions about me when I arrived because she didn't know me. She knows me now." A pause. "She just needs to be reminded of that." Ethan looked at her. "William," Clara said, "can you drive me? Ethan has that waterline repair today and it shouldn't wait." William looked at Ethan. Ethan nodded once. "Ready when you are," William said. Clara left. The door closed. Ethan sat alone in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the wagon pull out. He had known from the first week that Clara Bennett was capable. He had learned over 2 months that capable didn't begin to cover it. But watching her redirect, not retreat, redirect from a threat she could have met with anger and choosing instead the more effective move. The human move, the move that required more of her than a confrontation would have. He got up, went to the waterline. He worked all afternoon with the particular focus of a man who is keeping his hands busy so his mind can do what it needs to do. She came back that evening with color in her cheeks from the cold, and something that was almost not quite, but almost a look of satisfaction. She sat down, accepted the coffee Ethan handed her, and said, "Sarah Holt is going to have a conversation with the minister's wife tomorrow, and with 3 other women she described as, her words, the ones who actually matter in this town." Ethan sat down across from her. "What did you say to her?" "The truth," Clara said. "About why I came here, about the estate, and what Richard has been doing." She paused. "And about this." She gestured vaguely at the kitchen, at the house, at the space between them. "About what this actually is." "What did you tell her it was?" he said. She met his eyes. "I told her it was the realest thing that had happened to me in 4 years." The kitchen was very quiet. "Was that true?" he said. She held his gaze. "You know it is," she said. He looked at Clara, who had arrived with 1 suitcase and had proceeded to make his life larger and warmer and more worth living in every way he hadn't known to ask for, and felt the full weight of what had been building between them since September settle into the simple, irreducible truth of itself. "Clara," he started. The door banged open. Roy Dawson came in without knocking, which was standard, but with an urgency that was not. "He filed a counter-petition," Roy said, slightly out of breath. "Garrett told me an hour ago. Whitmore's attorneys, he had a local one draw it up this afternoon. Some man he brought from Helena filed a counter-petition claiming that Clara is unable to properly manage her affairs and requesting that the estate be placed in protective management." He stopped. "Under Richard Whitmore." The kitchen dropped several degrees in temperature that had nothing to do with the weather. Clara stood up. "On what grounds?" she said. Her voice was completely flat. "Erratic behavior since her father's death. Abandonment of legal obligations. And..." Roy looked genuinely uncomfortable. "They're claiming the marriage was executed under duress, that Clara entered into it while in a state of emotional instability following her father's death." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's a lie," Clara said. "I know that," Roy said. "Garrett knows it. But it's a legal petition, and it has to be answered." "Then we answer it," Clara said. "Clara, if a judge takes it seriously, he could issue a temporary order putting the estate in neutral management while the matter is heard. That could take months to resolve, and it gives Richard time to..." Roy stopped. "I'm sorry. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily." "You're not alarming me," Clara said. "You're giving me information." She turned to Ethan. "We need a lawyer here, not in Dayton, here in Montana." "Roy," Ethan said. "Judge Harlan. He's a fair man," Roy said. "But he's also formal. He'll follow the process." "Is there anyone in Black Pine Creek who practices law?" "There's Henry Marsh," Roy said slowly. "He's semi-retired, 70 years old, but he's sharp as anyone I've ever known, and he has 30 years of territorial law behind him." A pause. "And he doesn't like men from Cincinnati who come into his town throwing legal weight around. I know that for a fact." "Get him," Ethan said. Roy left. Clara stood at the table with her hands flat on it, looking at the documents in the box, as though running through their contents in her head. "He's good," she said quietly. "I know you think we have him cornered, but he's very good at finding angles." "So are you," Ethan said. She looked up. "Ethan, if a judge issues a temporary management order, it doesn't matter how good our evidence is in the long run. Richard gains control in the short term, and short term is enough for him to..." She stopped. "He could move assets, liquidate things. Even if we win eventually, there might not be much left to win." "Then we move faster than he does," Ethan said. "The legal process doesn't move fast." "Henry Marsh might," Ethan said. "And Judge Harlan has been on this bench for 20 years. He's seen men like Whitmore before." She looked at him. He could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she weighed things, assessed odds, measured risk. "What aren't you telling me?" she said. He paused. "This morning, before we went to town, I wrote a letter to an attorney I know in Helena, a man named Davies. I've done business with him for 10 years. I told him the situation, and I asked for his assessment." Clara stared at him. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure he'd respond quickly, And I didn't want to offer something I couldn't deliver. He held her gaze. He telegraphed back this afternoon while you were at Sarah Holt's. He knows Whitmore. Professionally. He's seen him operate in other states. The kitchen was very still. What did he say? Clara said. That Whitmore has done this before, Ethan said. Not to you specifically. A pattern. 2 other estate cases in the last 8 years, both involving properties he'd been managing for elderly clients who died without clear advocacy for their heirs. He paused. Both settled before reaching trial. Both settlements heavily favored Whitmore. Clara sat down slowly. He has a pattern, she said. Documented, Ethan said. Davies has contacts with the financial authorities in 2 states who have been looking at Whitmore for 3 years. They haven't had enough to move on him. He looked at her. Until your documents. She was quiet for a long moment. You did this today, she said. While you were doing this. We agreed to handle it together, he said. That's what together means. I did what I could do, you did what you could do. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not gratitude exactly, and not surprise exactly, but something that was a combination of both, filtered through the particular emotion of someone who has spent a long time doing everything alone. Ethan, she said. I need to say something. Go ahead. She took a breath. When I answered your advertisement, I told myself it was practical. A logical solution to a problem. I needed to be somewhere Richard couldn't reach easily, and you needed help with the ranch, and it made sense. She looked at her hands. I told myself for 2 months that that was what this was. I told myself the same thing, he said. She looked up. I told myself I wanted someone practical, he said. Someone to help manage the house and the supplies and the work. I told myself very clearly that I wasn't capable of caring about anyone and that I didn't want to be. He held her gaze. I was wrong about every part of that. She looked at him for a long moment. This is inconvenient timing, she said. I know. We have a legal crisis. I know. This is not the moment. Clara, he said, quietly, with the absolute steadiness of a man who has made up his mind. I've been in love with you since the morning I came into my kitchen and found you'd reorganized it so the coffee was easier to reach. She stared at him. That was the 3rd day, she said. I know when it was. Ethan, you don't have to say anything, he said. I'm not asking you for anything right now. I'm just done pretending that what's in this kitchen is only a practical arrangement. He looked at her directly. You deserve someone who says it out loud. The fire crackled. The wind moved the walls. Clara looked at him for a long, long moment. Then Henry Marsh knocked on the door, and Roy's voice called out from outside, and the legal crisis walked back in and took up its position at the kitchen table, and the moment was set aside, not lost, not abandoned, but folded carefully and placed where they could return to it. Henry Marsh was everything Roy had promised. He was 70 years old and built like a man who had once been substantial and had not entirely given it up, and he had the eyes of someone who had spent decades watching people try to get away with things and had developed an efficient impatience with it. He read every document in Clara's box in 45 minutes in complete silence, while Roy and Ethan sat on one side of the table and Clara on the other. Then he set the last page down and looked at Whitmore's counter-petition that Roy had brought from Garrett. He said, "This is the most transparent piece of legal maneuvering I've seen in 11 years, and I was present at the Donovan land case of 1881, which was ambitious." Clara looked at him. "Can we answer it effectively?" "We can bury it," Henry said. "The grounds he's citing require a showing that the person in question has demonstrated sustained inability to manage their affairs. What I see here," he gestured at her documents, "is the opposite. What I see here is a woman who has been managing an extremely complex situation with extraordinary competence while operating under significant personal stress." He tapped the counter-petition with one finger. What he's actually arguing is that she figured out what he was doing and ran before he could stop her. He just dressed it up in legal language. "Can you make that argument to Judge Harlan?" Ethan said. "I can make it in my sleep." Henry looked at Clara. "But I need everything you have, not just these. If there are letters, records, anything from your father's time with Whitmore." "I have more," Clara said. "Back at the ranch. Things I didn't bring today. I need them by tomorrow morning." "You'll have them." Henry nodded once. Then he looked at Ethan with the assessing gaze of a man sizing up an unfamiliar situation. "Your letter to Davies and Helena was smart thinking, son. His records of the other 2 cases are going to be valuable. I know a judge in Ohio who'll be interested in that pattern." He paused. "This isn't just about Clara's estate anymore. If we do this correctly, we can put Whitmore in front of a criminal proceeding." "That's what Clara wants," Ethan said. Henry looked at her. "It's what my father deserved," Clara said simply. "Richard sat at his bedside and held his hand and stole from him for 4 years. My father died trusting him." Her voice was flat and clear, and beneath it was something deep and old and patient, the anger of someone who has been waiting a long time for the right moment to act on it. "I want that in front of a judge." Henry Marsh looked at her for a moment. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "it will be." The next 3 days were the most intense of Ethan's adult life, and he had spent his adult life doing physically demanding work in one of the most demanding environments in the country. He drove Clara back to the ranch that night and watched her organize the additional documents with the focused speed of someone who had been mentally prepared for this moment for months. She worked at the kitchen table until past midnight, sorting, annotating, building the clearest possible evidentiary trail from what she had. Ethan stayed up with her not because there was anything he could do with the legal documents, but because he was not going to leave her at a table alone at midnight. He made coffee. He kept the fire. He read through what she handed him when she needed a second opinion on clarity. At one point, just before 1 in the morning, she looked up from a particularly dense set of ledger pages and found him looking at her, and she said, "You should sleep." "So should you," he said. "I'm almost done." "Then I'm almost done." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face softened. Not went weak, just softened the difference between a wall coming down and a door opening. "You said it out loud," she said, "earlier, before Henry came." He met her eyes. "I did. I haven't said anything back." "I noticed," he said. "I told you you don't have to. I want to." She set down her pen. She looked at him with the full, direct, careful attention she brought to everything she considered important. "I am not a woman who says things she doesn't mean, Ethan. I don't have the habit of it. So when I tell you something, you can hold me to it." "I know that," he said. "Then hold me to this." She held his gaze. "What happened to me in the 3 days after I got off that stage, the way this place started to feel like somewhere I belonged? The way you started to feel like—" She stopped, chose the next words carefully. "I came here for practical reasons, and I stayed for different ones. I have been staying for different ones since approximately the 2nd week of October." "The fence posts," he said. She blinked. "The afternoon we worked the fence posts," he said. "You told me it was the kindest thing I'd said to you. I thought about that for a week." "So did I," she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen table, covered in documents and lamp oil, and the evidence of 4 years of another man's crimes, and the absolute, uncomplicated reality of what was between them sat in the room as honestly as anything in those account records. "Finish the documents," he said. She almost smiled. "You're very practical at inconvenient times." "Learned from someone," he said. She picked up her pen. He got up and refilled both their coffees. They finished at 2:30 in the morning. Ethan drove the documents to Henry Marsh's house before sunrise. Richard Whitmore appeared at the courthouse at 9 o'clock the following morning with his Helena attorney and the confident bearing of a man who expected the home field advantage of legal complexity to slow everything down. He was not expecting Henry Marsh. He was not expecting Clara Bennett sitting in the front row with her hands folded and her back straight, and Ethan Caldwell beside her, to look the way she looked, not frightened, not uncertain, not the woman who had been managed and pressured and pursued across 1,000 miles. He was not expecting Judge Harlan, 60 years old, and deeply unimpressed by men who came from out of state, to complicate his docket, to have already read Henry Marsh's full filing, and the supporting documents from Davies and Helena before he sat down. And he was absolutely not expecting what Judge Harlan said before the Helena attorney had finished his third sentence. "Counselor," the judge's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "I've reviewed the documents filed by Mrs. Caldwell's representation this morning. I've also reviewed the records your client's attorney submitted yesterday." A pause. "I'd like to ask Mr. Whitmore a specific question before we proceed." Whitmore's attorney started to speak. "Mr. Whitmore," the judge said, ignoring the attorney completely, "can you explain to this court the purpose of the Whitmore Capital Management account opened in March of 1884, into which funds from the Bennett estate were transferred on 6 separate occasions totaling?" He looked at the paper in his hand. "This amount." He read the number aloud. The courtroom was very quiet. Whitmore's attorney leaned in immediately and whispered in his client's ear. Whitmore kept his face composed, but his hands folded on the table tightened. It was a small thing, a barely visible thing. Clara saw it. She had been watching for it for 4 years. Ethan felt her exhale beside him, not relief, but recognition. The exhale of someone who has been certain about something for a very long time and has finally found themselves in a room where the certainty is shared. "Take your time," Judge Harlan said pleasantly, and there was nothing pleasant about his tone. "We have all morning." What followed was not a single dramatic collapse. It was the methodical, procedural, careful dismantling of Richard Whitmore's position over the course of 4 hours, during which Henry Marsh presented documents. Davies's testimony by written affidavit was entered into the record, and Whitmore's attorney made increasingly strained arguments about context and interpretation that Judge Harlan heard with the patient skepticism of a man who has been doing this for 20 years. The counterpetition was dismissed before noon. Whitmore did not leave the courthouse a free man. He left under the understanding delivered by Judge Harlan in the flat administrative language that courtrooms use for devastating things, that a formal criminal referral to Ohio authorities would be submitted within the week, and that he was to make no further contact with Clara Bennett or any member of the Caldwell household under penalty of contempt. Clara stood outside the courthouse in the cold November air, and for a moment she simply stood there. Ethan stood beside her. Roy Dawson was talking to Henry Marsh 20 feet away. William had come to town for the occasion and was leaning against the wagon with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who is very satisfied. "It's not over," Clara said. "The criminal case will take time. His attorneys will fight it." "Yes," Ethan agreed. "But the estate is protected. The petition is dismissed. He can't touch anything while the investigation proceeds." She turned to look at him. "My father's money is where it belongs." "Where does it belong?" Ethan said. She thought about it seriously the way she thought about everything. "Somewhere useful," she said. "I never wanted it for myself. I just couldn't stand watching him keep it." She looked at Ethan. "There are things that need doing. The ranch could use—" "Clara," he said. "What?" "Not today," he said. "Today we go home." She looked at him. Then something happened that had been waiting to happen since September, since a woman with one suitcase stepped off a stage and shook a cowboy's hand and told him she believed they'd agreed to an honest arrangement. She smiled. Not the almost smile she'd been allowing herself in careful, controlled increments for 2 months. A real one. Wide and clear and unguarded, the smile of a woman who has put down something very heavy and discovered that her hands are free. "Home," she said, like the word was new, like she was trying the weight of it. "Yes," he said. He offered her his arm. She took it, and they walked to the wagon together, while Roy cheered loud enough to embarrass himself, and William Parker looked up at the Montana sky and shook his head slowly, smiling, as if the whole thing had been inevitable from the very beginning. Which, if you asked him, it had been. The ride back to the ranch was quiet in the way that only happens after something large has ended. Not empty quiet, full quiet. The kind that has weight and texture that settles around two people who have just come through something together and don't need to narrate it to each other because they were both there for every part of it. Clara sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat with her hands in her lap and her shoulders lower than he had seen them since September. Not defeated, released. There was a difference, and he understood it because he had felt something similar himself years ago. The day he finally stopped waiting for a grief to lift and accepted that it had changed shape, instead had become something he could carry rather than something carrying him. She was putting something down today. A 4-year wait, and the putting down had its own kind of exhaustion. "You should sleep when we get back," he said. "I won't be able to," she said. "Try anyway." She turned and looked at him with the slight dry humor she kept close to the surface when she was tired. "Are you always going to tell me practical things at emotional moments?" "Probably," he said. "It's a character flaw." "It's not a flaw," she said quietly. She looked back at the road. It's one of the things." He didn't push her to finish the sentence. He understood what the things were. He had his own list, and it was getting longer. When they pulled into the ranch yard, William was already there. He'd ridden ahead while Roy drove Clara and Ethan at a more deliberate pace. He had the horses tended and a fire going, and said nothing except, "Food's warm," when they came through the door, which was William's particular language for everything he didn't have words for. They ate. They were quiet. The ranch settled around them the way it did in the evenings. The particular sounds of a working place going still. The creak of the barn, the wind off the mountains, the fire doing its low, constant work. Clara ate half her food, and then put her fork down and sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "My father would have been angry," she said. Ethan looked up. "Not at me," she said. "At himself. For trusting Richard, for not seeing it." She brought her eyes back down. "He was a smart man. He built everything he had from almost nothing, and he was careful and sharp his entire life. And then, at the end, when he was sick and tired and—" She stopped. "Richard was kind to him. That's the thing. Richard was genuinely kind to him while he was dying and was stealing from him at the same time." She shook her head slowly. "How do you hold both of those things?" "With difficulty," Ethan said. She looked at him. "People aren't simple," he said. "Whitmore wasn't kind to your father because he was a good man. He was kind because keeping your father's trust was useful. But the kindness itself—" He paused. "Your father felt it. It was real to him, and that part wasn't wrong." She was quiet for a long moment. "I never thought about it that way," she said. "You've been angry," he said. "Anger makes things binary. That's what it's for. And now," he looked at her. "Now you won. You're allowed to let it be complicated." She looked back at him across the table, across the plates and the lamp and the flat wooden box of documents that had traveled so far and done what they needed to do. And something in her face settled further, the last piece of a long tension coming loose. "Ethan," she said. You said something this afternoon, before Henry arrived." She held his gaze with the directness that was so particular to her, the way she looked at things she'd decided to see clearly. "You said you'd been in love with me since the 3rd day." "I did say that," he said. "I said I'd been staying for different reasons since October." "You said that too." "I wasn't finished," she said. He waited. "I have been careful my entire adult life about what I said and what I showed and what I let people close enough to see." She didn't look away. "I was careful because the people I let close used what they saw, or they wanted something from what they saw." She paused. "With you, I stopped being careful somewhere around the 2nd week, and I didn't notice until later. That's never happened to me before." "What does it mean to you?" he said. "It means," she said carefully, that you are the first person in 4 years who made me forget to protect myself, and I didn't suffer for it." A pause. That's the whole answer. Ethan looked at the woman across the table at Clara, who had arrived in September with one suitcase and had proceeded to fix everything she could reach and guard everything she couldn't and hold herself together through a legal battle that would have broken most people who made soup for ranch hands and reorganized supply rooms and stood in front of Richard Whitmore without flinching, who had hummed quietly in his kitchen, and told him his house felt like somewhere she belonged and meant it the way she meant everything completely and without decoration. He got up from his chair. He walked around the table. He stood in front of her, and she looked up at him and he said, "Clara Bennett, I wrote the least romantic advertisement in the history of that agency, and somehow the right woman answered it. I don't know how that happens. I don't need to know." He looked at her. "I just need you to know that you are home. You have been home since September. Whatever you decide to do with the estate, wherever this legal case goes, whatever comes next, this ranch, this house, this kitchen is yours. I am yours. That's not going to change." She stood up. She was close enough that he could see the decision in her eyes the second she made it. She put her hand on his face, her work rough, practical, competent hand, and said, "Then stop being so careful about the distance between us." He closed it. William Parker found the next morning that there was a reason to be in the far north pasture, checking a fence line that absolutely required his attention for the better part of the morning, and he was very committed to being there. Roy arrived at 10 o'clock, because Roy arrived when Roy arrived, and found Clara at the kitchen table with coffee, and the look of a woman who has slept properly for the first time in months. And he sat down across from her, and accepted the cup she poured without being asked, and said nothing for a respectful amount of time. Then he said, "Well?" "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. She looked at him with the expression she used for Roy's particular brand of involvement. "You are the most intrusive neighbor in Montana Territory." "I prefer invested," he said. "I know you do." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "Your situation, the legal case. How long will it take? Henry says the Ohio criminal proceeding will take 6 months to a year. Whitmore will fight it." She said it without the tension that had accompanied every mention of it for weeks. "But the estate is protected now. The petition is dismissed. Whatever Richard does next, he's doing it without the ability to touch my father's accounts." She paused. "He's lost the thing that mattered." "And what are you going to do with it?" Roy said. "The estate." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that since last night." She looked at her coffee cup. "There are families in this territory who are struggling. The winter is hard and getting harder, and some of the smaller operations, the ones without the land base to absorb a bad season—" She paused. "There are things that could be done, practical things, not charity, but investment, in people who are doing real work and just need a better foundation." Roy looked at her. "Ethan, know you're thinking this way," he said. "We talked about it this morning." She almost smiled. He suggested the Hendersons first. Their south pasture fence has been failing for 2 seasons, and they can't afford the materials. Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father would have liked him." She looked up. "I didn't know your father," Roy said. "But a man who built what you described from nothing, who was careful and sharp and valued real things, he would have looked at Ethan Caldwell and recognized him." He held her gaze. "The right kind of man is recognizable to the right kind of father." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you, Roy," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I brought the pamphlet." She laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine and warm, the laugh of a woman who has been carrying too much for too long and has finally put it down in a place where it's safe. Roy grinned like a man who had accomplished something. Ethan found her that afternoon in the supply room, not reorganizing it. She had reorganized it 2 months ago, and it had stayed organized because she had built a system logical enough that even he couldn't disrupt it. She was taking inventory. The winter was coming down hard off the mountains now, the serious cold that turned everything sharp and still, and the supply situation was exactly what her October list had prepared for solid sufficient, the product of two people who had planned carefully. She was standing with her list and her pen, and she heard him come in and didn't look up. "We have enough lamp oil," she said. "I know," he said. "And the salt is—" "Clara," he said. She looked up. "Come outside," he said. She set down her list. She followed him out. He was standing a few feet from the door, looking at the mountains. The sky over them was the deep, absolute blue of a Montana November afternoon. The kind of blue that costs something that requires the cold and the altitude and the particular quality of high country winter air to produce. "You noticed this when you first arrived," he said. "The sky." She came to stand beside him. "I said you used to notice it," she said. "I'm noticing it now." They stood together in the cold, not touching, just present in the way they had learned to be present together since September, comfortable enough in each other's company that closeness didn't require physical evidence to be real. "What are you thinking?" she said. "That 9 months ago, I sat at this table and wrote a letter that I expected almost nothing from," he said. "And that everything I have that matters right now in this moment came from that letter." He looked at her. "I spent 9 years telling myself the ranch was enough. The work was enough. Keeping my head down and my feelings buried and my life small was enough." He shook his head. "It wasn't. I just got very good at not admitting it." "People do that," she said. "You did it too," he said. "I did," she agreed. "I got so good at managing myself that I almost managed myself out of everything worth having." "Almost," he said. She looked at him. "Almost." The cold settled around them. Below, somewhere in the barn, one of the horses moved a low, familiar sound. William would be finishing the afternoon work. The ranch was going through its evening routines, the same ones it had run for years, except that now they felt different, not because the routines had changed, but because the people in them had. "I want to do a real ceremony," Clara said. Ethan looked at her. "We had a legal ceremony," she said. "In town with the justice of the peace, very practical and brief. I wore my second best dress." She paused. "I would like to do it again, with more intention." "You want a wedding?" he said. "I want our wedding," she said. "The first one was the arrangement. I want the real one." He studied her face. She was serious the way she was always serious, genuinely, completely, with the full weight of her attention behind it. "Spring," he said. "Why spring?" "Because by spring, the legal case will have progressed, and Whitmore will be less of a cloud, and because the Dawson's Meadow is something to see in April, and because Roy will be insufferable about the planning if we give him enough lead time, and—" He looked at her. "Because you deserve a good day. Not a practical one. A good one." She stared at him. "You've thought about this," she said. "Since approximately October," he said. "The fence posts," she said. "The fence posts," he agreed. Something moved across her face. Something that had no clean name, but that Ethan had learned to read as the expression Clara made when she was as happy as she knew how to be, and was slightly startled by it. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he said. She took his arm the way she had outside the courthouse, and they stood together looking at the mountains, while the light changed and the cold deepened and the ranch went through its evening. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Davies in Helena. Ethan brought it in from the post office on a Friday afternoon. Clara was at the table with the account books she had taken over the ranch accounts in October, and they were in better shape than they had ever been, organized and annotated in her small handwriting, with marginal notes that showed exactly where every dollar had gone and where it was going. She looked at the letter, opened it, read it. Then she set it down on the table and looked at it for a long moment. "What is it?" Ethan said. "Ohio has issued a warrant," she said, "for Richard's arrest, on 3 counts of criminal fraud." She looked up. "Davies says the documents I provided combined with the records from the other 2 cases were enough. The financial authorities moved faster than anyone expected." A pause. Richard was arrested in Cincinnati yesterday. The kitchen was very still. It's over, Ethan said. The criminal part is beginning, she said. The trial will take Clara. He sat down across from her. The part where he could hurt you is over. She looked at the letter. Yes, she said quietly. That part is over. How do you feel? She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. Like I can breathe in all the way, she said. For the first time in 4 years, he looked at her across the table at the woman who had come into his life with one suitcase and had transformed every part of it that needed transforming, including the parts he hadn't known needed it, and felt the thing he had been carrying since September resolve itself into something clean and permanent. Breathe, he said. She did. The winter settled in fully after that, the serious Montana kind that locked the mountains white and made the road to town impassable for stretches of days. And Ethan discovered something he could not have predicted when he wrote his careful, unromantic advertisement in the spring. Being snowed in with the right person was nothing like being alone. It was the opposite of being alone. They played cards in the evenings. Clara was better at it than him and didn't pretend otherwise, which he respected. They read aloud to each other from the limited collection of books on the shelf. Clara's reading voice was low and even and made everything she read more interesting. They argued twice about genuine things, once about the best approach to the spring planting rotation, and once about something so small he couldn't remember what it was 3 days later. And both arguments resolved themselves in the straightforward way that arguments between honest people resolve with one of them being right and the other one admitting it. He was right about the planting rotation. She was right about the other thing. He told her so, and she said, "I know," with the expression she used when she was trying not to smile. William observed all of it from his careful distance and said one afternoon in January, when he and Ethan were working in the barn, and the snow was coming down outside, in the way that made everything beyond 20 feet invisible. "You know what the difference is?" "In what?" Ethan said. "In you," William said. "Since September." Ethan kept working. "You talk," William said. "You used to go 3 days without a full sentence. Now I can barely get a word in." He said it without complaint. "Also, you laugh. I'd forgotten what that sounded like." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "She talks," he said. "Hard to be quiet when someone else is talking." "She's not talking right now," William pointed out. "She's in the house. And you've said 17 words in the last 10 minutes. 17 is more than 3, Ethan said. William smiled and went back to what he was doing. It was true, Ethan thought. He talked more. Not more than was necessary. He wasn't becoming Roy, which was a specific concern, but more than he had. Because Clara asked questions that deserved real answers and made observations that required genuine responses, and created simply by being present and paying attention, a conversational environment in which silence felt like a choice rather than a default. He had forgotten what it was to choose silence. He found he preferred choosing it. Tap, 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 tag. In February, a letter arrived from Clara's attorney in Dayton. It was a long letter, detailed and careful, and it laid out the current state of the criminal proceeding against Richard Whitmore. And also, this was the part that required Clara to sit down and read it twice, the full accounting of the estate, as it stood after Davies's investigation and the Ohio Financial Authority's review. The number at the bottom of the final page was larger than what Clara had told Ethan in October, significantly larger. She came to find him in the barn. She stood in the doorway and said, "The full accounting came." He looked at her. He could tell from her face that the number was not what she had expected. "And?" he said. She told him. He set down what he was holding. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone waiting for a reaction she can't entirely predict. "Clara," he said, "what do you want to do with it? Not what would you like to buy. Not we could expand the ranch 10 times over. Not the reaction of a man doing math about what a number that large could mean for his own situation. What do you want to do with it?" She breathed in all the way. "I want to do what I told Roy," she said. "The Hendersons first. And the Ryans, their water situation needs proper infrastructure, not just patching." She paused. "And I want to set aside enough to build a proper schoolhouse. The children in this county are riding too far in bad weather for school." He looked at her. "And the ranch," he said. "The ranch is already what it needs to be," she said. "It's ours. We built it." She met his eyes. "It doesn't need to be bigger to be better." Ethan looked at the woman standing in his barn doorway in February in Montana, telling him that a fortune was less important than a fence line and a schoolhouse and what they had already built together, and felt something that had no useful name except perhaps the one that had been true since October, and that he had said out loud and didn't need to say again, because she already knew it, and he already knew she knew it. "All right," he said. "That's it," she said. "All right. What would you like me to say?" "I just told you about a very significant amount of money." "You told me what you want to do with it," he said, "which sounds right to me." He picked up what he'd set down and went back to work. "Start with the Hendersons. Their south fence has been bad since last spring." She stared at him. Then she laughed. The real laugh, the surprised one. The one that came out when he said something so perfectly characteristically unmistakably himself that her system couldn't hold it. "You are the most infuriating practical man," she said. "You knew that in September," he said. "The advertisement was very clear." She was still laughing when she went back to the house. He smiled at the horse he was brushing privately, in the way a man smiles when no one is watching, and the feeling is too good to keep entirely internal. Oh. Spring came, the way Montana spring comes, sudden and absolute and enormous. The world going from white to green in what felt like a week, the mountains shedding their cold in rushing streams, and the air losing its edge, and everything that had been locked under the freeze coming back to itself. Ethan repaired the Hendersons' south fence in the first week of April. Clara organized the materials and the scheduling, and showed up to help on the second day, and Mrs. Henderson, a woman of 60, with the look of someone who had worked hard her whole life and knew the difference between help offered genuinely and help offered for appearance, took Clara's hands in hers at the end of the day and said nothing, just held them for a moment, and that was enough. The wedding was on the 15th of April. Roy had, as predicted, been involved in the planning to a degree that required diplomatic management, but the result was what Ethan had promised: a good day. The Dawsons' meadow in April was the kind of thing that made people who didn't believe in anything in particular reconsider their position. Clara wore a dress that was not her second best. Ethan wore his good shirt and his best hat, and the expression of a man who is completely aware that he is the luckiest person present. Henry Marsh performed the ceremony. He was not ordained, but Roy had looked into it, and it turned out that in Montana territory, a man of sufficient community standing could perform a legal ceremony with the appropriate documentation, and Henry Marsh had more than sufficient standing, and had prepared a ceremony that was, as he put it, legally sound and humanly decent. William Parker stood to Ethan's left. Roy stood to Clara's right, which was not traditional but was Roy. And no one was going to argue with Roy on this particular day. When it came time for the vows, Henry asked them if they had prepared anything to say. They had not discussed this. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Clara. He said, "I wrote you the least romantic advertisement in the history of that agency. You answered it anyway. You came here with one suitcase and you fixed everything that needed fixing, and you made this house a home, and you made me want to live in it again." He looked at her directly. "I promise to tell you the truth. I promise to take you seriously. I promise to keep the coffee strong and the fire going." He paused. "I promise that whatever comes, we face it the same way we faced everything else, together." The meadow was completely quiet. Clara held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I came here for practical reasons. I stayed because I forgot to protect myself, and I didn't suffer for it. That's the whole story." Her voice was even and clear and meant every syllable. "I promise to tell you the truth and to fix things when they break. and to ask for help when I need it, which I am still learning to do. A pause. I promise that this is my home. You are my home. And I am not going anywhere. Roy Dawson. 62 years old. Loud as a summer thunderstorm, absolutely incapable of minding his own business, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and then looked at William to see if William had noticed. William had noticed. William was also very quietly not entirely dry-eyed. Neither of them mentioned it. Then or ever. The years that followed were what Ethan had promised in his letter: difficult winters, long workdays, a remote ranch far from anything easy. They were also the best years of his life. The schoolhouse was built in the fall, and a teacher was found by spring. The Henderson property stabilized. 3 other families in the county received the kind of quiet, practical assistance that didn't call attention to itself because Clara had not done it for attention. The ranch grew, not because they chased growth, but because 2 capable people, working the same land toward the same goals, produce results that one person working alone cannot. They hired 2 hands by the 2nd year. By the 3rd year, Caldwell Ranch was known in the territory as a place that ran well and treated people fairly, which was Ethan's reputation extended by Clara's and compounded by both. Richard Whitmore's trial concluded in the fall of the 2nd year. He was convicted on 2 of the 3 counts. Clara attended the final day of the proceeding in Ohio, with Ethan beside her, and she watched the verdict delivered with the same steady, clear attention she brought to everything important. She didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She sat in that courtroom and let herself feel what it felt like for something to be finished. On the train back to Montana, Ethan asked her, "Is it what you wanted?" She thought about it for a long time. "It's what was just," she said. "That's better than what I wanted." He looked at her. "What did you want?" he said. She looked out the window at the country going past. "I wanted my father back," she said quietly. "I wanted a different 4 years. I wanted none of it to have happened." She paused. "But since I can't have that, justice is the best available thing. And the best available thing, if you're lucky, is enough." She turned back from the window. She looked at him, at the man who had written an honest letter and meant every word of it, who had taken her seriously from the first handshake, who had stood beside her through every part of what had needed standing through, who kept the coffee strong and the fire going, and had been from the 3rd day the thing she had stopped protecting herself against because he had never given her a reason to. "I'm lucky," she said, simply. "So am I," he said. The train moved through the country. Outside the windows, the landscape opened up wide and enormous and impossibly beautiful, the kind of country that required everything from the people who chose to live in it and gave back to those who could stay everything worth having. They rode home in the easy quiet of people who have run out of things to prove to each other. People in Black Pine Creek told the story for years afterward. The cowboy who placed an advertisement asking for practicality, and received by some grace he had not known to ask for the right woman. The woman who answered a letter written without romance, and found in a remote Montana ranch, the first place in 4 years that felt like somewhere she belonged. They told it the way good stories get told, with additions and embellishments, with the details sharpened by repetition and the sentiment deepened by time, until the version that circulated through the territory had more poetry in it than either Ethan or Clara would have recognized. But the core of it stayed true. Because the core of it was simple. A man who had stopped believing in the possibility of a life that felt worth living was given by his own unlikely honesty and one woman's willingness to answer it exactly that. And a woman who had spent 4 years being careful about everything finally found the one place and the one person where being careful was no longer necessary. The luckiest man in Black Pine Creek. That was what he had called himself in Whitmore's face in the yard that October afternoon. He had said it as a statement of position, a challenge, a fact he was prepared to defend. He had not known in that moment how completely he meant it. He knew now. He would know it for the rest of his life. Every morning he woke before sunrise and found coffee already made. Every evening he came in from the field and found the fire already lit every quiet night and hard winter and good spring that followed. The knowledge sat in his chest, as steady and certain as the mountains. He had written a letter asking for someone practical. He had received instead everything. And Ethan Caldwell, the cowboy who never smiled, smiled every single day for the rest of his life, and never once took it for granted.